The champagne flutes shattered against marble floors. 300 guests gasped in unison. And Victor Marcellus Romano, the most feared Mafia boss in New York City, stood frozen at the altar like a man who had just seen a ghost. Because he had. The ghost of the only woman he'd ever truly loved had just walked through the cathedral doors, wearing a simple waitress uniform. And the 2 words she spoke next would change everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and the price of the choices we make. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay with me until the end of this story. Because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances, and prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. And if this story touches your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because we bring you real stories about real people facing impossible choices, and your support helps us continue sharing these powerful messages with the world. Now, let me take you back to where it all really began, 7 years before that wedding day. To a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn where a young college student named Isabella Martinez was working the night shift to pay her tuition. Isabella had never planned to be a waitress. She had dreams, big ones. She wanted to be a social worker, to help children who grew up in circumstances like she did. In neighborhoods where violence was as common as the sunrise and hope was a luxury few could afford. Her mother had cleaned houses for 20 years to give Isabella a chance at something better. And every night Isabella wore that black and white uniform. She did it with her mother's sacrifices weighing on her shoulders like an invisible crown. It was a Tuesday evening in October when Victor Romano first walked into Giovanni's trattoria. Isabella remembered it clearly because Tuesdays were usually slow. And she had been studying for her social psychology exam at the corner booth when the door opened, and he entered with 4 men in expensive suits, flanking him like an honor guard. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone in Brooklyn knew the Romano family. They were the kind of people you didn't talk about, didn't look at too long, didn't ask questions about. Victor's father, Antonio Romano, had built an empire that stretched from the Diamond District, and Victor, at 28, was being groomed to take over the throne of this dark kingdom. But when Isabella looked up from a textbook that night, she didn't see a mafia prince. She saw a man whose eyes carried a wariness that seemed far older than his years, whose shoulders bore invisible weights that made him move like someone always expecting an attack. She saw someone who looked as tired of his life as she sometimes felt of hers. "Table for 5, Victor had said, his voice deep and measured. The kind of voice that was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Isabella had grabbed 5 menace and led them to the best table in the restaurant. The one by the window overlooking the street, where the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn gold. She didn't know then that this simple act of showing a man to a table would become the first thread in a tapestry that would take 7 years to weave. Over the following months Victor came back to Giovanni's every Tuesday night. Always at 8 o'clock, always the same table, and always, if the shift rotation allowed, he would wait for Isabella to serve him. At first, their conversations were transactional professional. He ordered the veal marsala. She brought it. He asked for wine. She poured it. But gradually in the spaces between courses words began to flow. He asked her what she was studying. She told him about her dreams of becoming a social worker, about wanting to help kids in troubled neighborhoods find paths away from violence. And something flickered in his eyes when she said that, something that looked almost like pain. "Noble dream," he had said quietly, swirling the wine in his glass. "The world needs more people who believe they can fix broken things." "What about you?" Isabella had asked, emboldened by something in his tone that suggested a crack in his armor. "What do you believe in?" Victor had looked at her for a long moment, and in that gaze, Isabella felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we are all prisoners of the choices made for us before we were old enough to choose for ourselves." That conversation opened a door. Week after week, Tuesday after Tuesday they talked. He told her about growing up as Antonio Romano's son, about learning to shoot a gun before learning to ride a bicycle. About being taught that loyalty to family meant loyalty to a business built on fear and blood. She told him about her father's death in a gang shooting when she was 7, about her mother's 3 jobs, about the scholarship that was her ticket to a different life. They were from different worlds, separated by a chasm that should have been impossible to bridge. But there in that small Italian restaurant, over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they found something neither had expected: recognition. They recognized in each other the struggle of trying to be someone different than who the world insisted they must be. It was on a cold February night, almost 4 months after that first Tuesday, when everything changed. Isabella was closing up the restaurant alone, the owner having gone home early with a migraine. She was wiping down the last table when she heard the back door crash open, and 3 men rushed in, their faces covered with ski masks, guns drawn. "Where's the safe?" the tallest one demanded, his gun aimed directly at Isabella's chest. "We know Giovanni keeps cash here. Open it now or I swear I'll—" His threat was cut short by a single gunshot that echoed through the empty restaurant like thunder. The man crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg, his gun skittering across the tile floor. Isabella looked toward the source of the shot and saw Victor standing in the doorway, his weapon still raised, his face carved from ice. "You made a mistake," Victor said, his voice so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "This restaurant is under my protection. And you just put a gun to the head of someone I care about." The 2 other men fled, leaving their wounded companion behind. Victor made a phone call, speaking in rapid Italian, and within minutes, 3 men arrived to take the wounded robber away. Throughout it all, Isabella stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. When they were alone, Victor set his gun on the table and looked at Isabella with something close to desperation in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I brought this world anywhere near you." But Isabella surprised him. Instead of fear, she felt something else entirely. She walked up to him, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "You saved my life. I endangered it by coming here in the first place," Victor replied bitterly. "My enemies watch me, Isabella. They look for weaknesses. And now you're—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "On what?" Isabella asked softly. Victor looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before in this careful, controlled man: raw, unguarded emotion. "You're the first thing in my entire life that feels real. The first person who talks to me like I'm just a man. Not a weapon or an asset or a heir to a throne I never wanted. When I'm with you, I can almost imagine being someone different." Isabella reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "Then be someone different. You have a choice, Victor." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand. In my world, there are no exits. My father has associates the families we're tied to. Leaving isn't an option. The only way out is in a coffin." "Then don't leave," Isabella said, an idea forming in her mind even as she spoke. "Change it from the inside. You're going to take over someday, right? When you do, use that power differently. Help people instead of hurting them. Protect instead of destroy." Victor looked at her like she had just suggested he fly to the moon. "You think it's that simple?" "No," Isabella admitted. "I think it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But I've spent my whole life studying human behavior, Victor. And I know that people aren't born good or evil. We're shaped by our choices, moment by moment, decision by decision. You can choose to be different." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but neither could resist. They started meeting outside the restaurant, in secret. Stolen moments that felt like treasures hoarded away from a world that would never approve. They would walk through Prospect Park after midnight when the paths were empty, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about the weight of his father's expectations, about the violence he had witnessed and participated in, about the nightmares that woke him sweating in the dark. She told him about her dreams for the future, about the thesis she was writing on breaking cycles of violence in communities, about her belief that people could change if given the right support and motivation. And slowly, impossibly, Victor began to change. He started asking questions in his father's meetings, challenging strategies that put innocent people in harm's way. He began to redirect some of the family's resources toward legitimate businesses, arguing that the future of their enterprise needed to evolve. His father was skeptical but impressed by his son's strategic thinking. Not realizing that every suggestion came from conversations with a college student, Waitress, who was teaching him to see the world through different eyes. For 2 years, their secret relationship continued, hidden from both of their worlds. Isabella graduated with honors and began working at a community center in one of Brooklyn's toughest neighborhoods. Victor took on more responsibility in the family business, slowly, carefully trying to steer it toward less violent waters. They were happy in the way people are happy when they know they're living on borrowed time, treasuring every moment, because they don't know how many they have left. And then Antonio Romano had a heart attack. It happened suddenly, dramatically, during a family dinner. One moment he was toasting to his son's recent successes. The next he was on the floor, his face gray, his breath coming in gasps. He survived, but the doctors were clear his heart was damaged, his time was limited. And he needed to step back from the stress of running his empire. Which meant Victor would over immediately, years earlier than planned. The night before his official ascension, Victor came to Isabella's small apartment in bed. The first and only time he had been there. He looked exhausted. Older somehow, the weight of what was coming pressing down on him like a physical force. "I want to tell him about you," he said without preamble. Sitting on her worn couch and taking her hands in his. "I want to make this official. I want you by my side, not hidden away like some secret I'm ashamed of." Isabella's heart soared and sank simultaneously. "Victor, you know what that would mean. Your father, his associates, the other families. They would never accept me. I'm not from your world. I have no connections, no family name, nothing to bring to a marriage except myself. You're everything," Victor said fiercely, pulling her close. "You're the only pure thing in my entire corrupted life. You're the reason I've been trying to change. The reason I believe change is even possible. I love you, Isabella. I've loved you since that first Tuesday when you looked at me like I was just a person, not a monster." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "I love you too, you know I do. But I also know your world, I've been studying it, remember. The Mafia doesn't just marry for love, Victor. They marry for alliances, for power, for strategic advantage. If you try to make me your wife, they'll see it as weakness. They'll test you, challenge you, maybe even try to eliminate you. Let them try," Victor said with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight. "I'll handle whatever comes." But Isabella knew better. She had spent 2 years researching organized crime for her work at the community center, understanding the patterns, the rules, the unspoken codes that governed that world. She knew that the moment Victor declared his love for her publicly, she would become a target. Every enemy he had, every rival who wanted his position, every traditionalist who thought he was too soft, they would all come for her to get to him. "Promise me something," she said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Promise me you won't announce anything yet. Let yourself get established first. Prove yourself as a leader. Then, when you're secure, when no one can question your position, then we can be together openly." Victor didn't want to agree. She could see the resistance in every line of his body. But he also knew she was right. So he promised. They would wait 1 year. He would cement his control. Make the changes he wanted to make, establish himself as the unquestioned head of the Romano family. And then, when the time was right, he would claim her as his own before God and everyone. That year was the longest of Isabella's life. She threw herself into her work, helping at-risk youth find alternatives to gang life, counseling families torn apart by violence, writing grants to bring more resources to her community. Meanwhile, Victor navigated the treacherous waters of Mafia leadership, carefully building alliances, strategically showing strength where it mattered, gradually steering family business toward legitimate enterprises without triggering a rebellion from the old guard. They still saw each other, but less frequently, more carefully. Every meeting was a risk. Every phone call was potentially monitored. Every moment together was precious and terrifying, And then, 11 months into their agreed year of waiting, Victor's mother called him with news that would change everything. Sofia Romano had been diagnosed with stage IV pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe less, and she had one dying wish: to see her only son married to a woman from a good family, to know that the Romano line would continue with grandchildren, who carried the blood of 2 great houses. Victor told Isabella on a Tuesday night. It was always Tuesday when their world shifted. Sitting in the same booth at Giovanni's where they had first talked all those years ago. His face was gray with anguish. "She's dying, Isabella. My mother is dying. And the only thing she wants is to see me married. She's already made arrangements with the Catalano family. Their daughter, Francesca. I've known her since we were children. It would unite 2 of the most powerful families, strengthen our position, secure our future. And you're going to do it," Isabella said, her voice hollow. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what else to do." Victor's hands were shaking. Something she had never seen before. "If I refuse, it will break her heart. She'll die disappointed in me. Thinking I'm throwing away the family's future for nothing. Because I can't tell her about you putting you in danger. And if I tell her the truth, she'll blame herself for keeping us apart, she'll die with that guilt. And you'll become a target for everyone who sees this marriage alliance as crucial to our stability." Isabella felt something breaking inside her chest. A physical pain that made it hard to breathe. "How long does she have?" 4 months, maybe 5. "And the wedding?" "They want to do it soon. While she's still well enough to attend. 6 weeks from now." 6 weeks. Isabella did the math. Their agreed upon year would have been up in 3 weeks. They had been so close, so impossibly close to being together openly. And now this. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "We could tell your mother the truth. She might understand." "She might. She won't." Victor erupted, his voice heavy with certainty. "My mother is old world, Isabella. Family honor, tradition, alliances, these things are sacred to her. If I tell her I'm in love with a waitress with no family connections, she'll see it as me choosing personal happiness over family duty. It will devastate her." "And what about my devastation?" The words came out sharper than Isabella intended. "What about the fact that you're asking me to stand aside while you marry someone else? To watch the man I love promise himself to another woman? It won't mean anything," Victor said, reaching for her hands, but she pulled away. "Francesca knows it's a business arrangement. We'll live separate lives. And when enough time has passed, when my mother is gone and things have settled, we can." "We can what?" Isabella demanded, anger rising through her grief. "I'll be what, Victor? Your mistress. The woman you visit on Tuesday nights while your wife hosts dinner parties and raises your children. Is that the future you're offering me?" "I'm offering you the only future I can." Victor's voice rose, matching hers. Years of frustration and helplessness pouring out. "Do you think this is what I want? Do you think I want to marry a woman I don't love, build a life that's a lie? Pretend every day that you don't exist? I'm trying to navigate an impossible situation, and you're not making it easier." The words hung between them like smoke. They had never fought like this, never raised their voices at each other. The restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, the walls pressing up. Isabella stood up. Her purse clutched in shaking hands. "You're right. I'm not making it easier. Because I can't stand here and support you marrying someone else. I can't be understanding about this, Victor. I can't. Isabella, please, no." She held up a hand, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. "You have to make a choice. Your mother's comfort, your family's expectations, your position in a world I've always known I don't belong in, or me. Us. The future we've been planning, you have to choose." "That's not fair," Victor said, and he looked truly broken. "You're asking me to let my mother die disappointed. And you're asking me to live the rest of my life as a secret," Isabella countered. "Tell me. Which of us is being asked to sacrifice more?" They stared at each other across the table. Across the impossible gulf that had always existed between their worlds but that love had let them pretend didn't matter. Now, faced with the harsh reality of the choice, they both knew the truth: some chasms are too wide to bridge. some worlds too different to merge. I love you, Victor said, his voice breaking. You have to know that. Everything I've done, everything I've tried to become, it's been for you, because of you. I know, Isabella whispered. But love isn't enough, is it? Not in your world. Your world needs alliances and arrangements and sacrifices. And I can't be one of those sacrifices, Victor. I won't. She walked out of Giovanni's trattoria that night and Victor let her go. What else could he do? Chase her down the street, make promises he couldn't keep. Ask her to accept crumbs of a life when she deserved the whole feast. He sat at that table for hours after she left, until the owner came to tell him they were closing. Over the next 6 weeks, Victor Romano prepared for his wedding to Francesca Catalano while his heart remained with a woman he could not have. Francesca was beautiful, polite, intelligent, and utterly uninterested in him beyond what their marriage would accomplish for both families. They had 3 conversations before the wedding, all of them efficiently covering logistics: where they would live, what her role would be in family functions, the understanding that this was a partnership of convenience and nothing more. Meanwhile, Isabella tried to bury herself in work and failed. She counseled teenagers about making good choices, while knowing she had made the choice to walk away from the man she loved. She talked to parents about the importance of being present in their children's lives, while knowing the one person she wanted to be present with was measuring for a wedding suit. Her friends at the community center noticed her decline. Her mother, visiting from Florida where she had retired, took one look at her daughter and knew something was terribly wrong. But Isabella couldn't explain. How could she tell anyone that she had been secretly in love with a mafia boss, that he was about to marry someone else? That her heart was breaking in ways she didn't think she would survive. The day of the wedding arrived crisp and clear. One of those perfect late spring days when New York City almost feels like paradise. Victor Romano stood at the altar of St. Patrick's Cathedral. 300 guests filling the pews behind him, his dying mother in the front row weeping with joy, and felt nothing but a vast emptiness where his soul used to be. Francesca would arrive soon in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The Archbishop would say the words. Victor would recite his vows, and they would all be lies. He would promise to love and honor a woman he barely knew, while the woman he actually loved was somewhere out there. Probably still in her small apartment, definitely suffering as much as he was. The organ music started. The guests rose, and Francesca appeared at the far end of the cathedral, a vision in white. Her father's arm guiding her down the aisle toward a future neither of them wanted but both had accepted as inevitable. Victor watched her approach, each step bringing her closer, counting down the moments until his life became a permanent lie. 50 feet away. 40. And then the cathedral doors burst open, and Isabella Martinez walked in. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress or fancy clothes. She wore her waitress uniform from Giovanni's, the black and white that she had been wearing the first night he saw her and 1,000 Tuesday nights after. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing but herself and a determination that made her shine brighter than any bride. The music stopped. Francesca stopped. 300 guests turned in their seats. And Victor Romano, the most powerful mafia boss in New York City, froze. Isabella walked down that aisle like she owned it. Like she had every right to be there. Her eyes locked on Victor's with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. She walked past stunned faces, past whispers that rose like a wave. Past Victor's mother, whose expression cycled through shock to confusion, to something that might have been understanding. She walked right up to the altar, standing between Victor and Francesca, and she spoke 2 words that changed everything. I object. The cathedral erupted, voices rose in shock and outrage. Victor's mother gasped. Antonio Romano, attending despite doctor's orders, half rose from his seat, his face purple with fury. The Archbishop stood frozen, clearly having no protocol for this situation. But Victor only had eyes for Isabella. What are you doing? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, caught between hope and horror. What I should have done 6 weeks ago, Isabella said, her voice clear and strong despite the chaos around them. I'm fighting for what we have. I'm not going to stand aside and watch you build a life that's a lie. I'm not going to let you marry her when we both know you love me. You're ruining everything, Victor said. But there was no anger in his voice, only wonder. Good. Isabella replied. Because everything you've built here today deserves to be ruined. This wedding is a business transaction dressed up as love. This marriage would be a prison for both of you. She turned to Francesca, who stood still as a statue in her wedding gown. I'm sorry for disrupting your day. But he doesn't love you, and you don't love him, and you both know it. You're giving up your life to please families that see you as a bargaining chip. Don't you deserve more than that? Francesca looked at Isabella for a long moment, and something passed between them. Some understanding that transcended the chaos of the moment. Then Francesca did something no one expected. She smiled. Thank God, she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet that had fallen. I've been trying to figure out how to get out of this for weeks. She looked at Victor. No offense. None taken, Victor said, still staring at Isabella like he was trying to figure out if she was real. This is outrageous. Antonio Romano's voice boomed through the cathedral. Victor, tell this woman to immediately. Our guests, our families, the Archbishop.
This is a disgrace.
Victor looked at his father, at the man who had shaped his entire life, who had taught him that power mattered more than happiness, that family duty trumped personal desire, that love was a weakness to be exploited. Then he looked at Isabella. At the woman who had taught him that change was possible. That choices mattered. That who you are is more important than what you're born to be. And Victor Romano made a choice. No, he said simply, quietly, but the word carried like thunder. What did you say? Antonio demanded. I said no. Father. Victor stepped away from the altar, from Francesca, from the life that had been planned for him. He walked to Isabella and took her hands in his. You're right. This is a disgrace. It's a disgrace that I was willing to marry a woman I don't love to maintain a business alliance. It's a disgrace that I almost let the best thing in my life walk away, because I was too afraid to fight for her. It's a disgrace that I thought I had to choose between making my mother happy and being true to myself. He turned to face the crowd, still holding Isabella's hands. This woman's name is Isabella Martinez. I've been in love with her for 4 years. She's a social worker who helps at-risk kids find better paths. She's brilliant and brave and the only person who's ever looked at me and seen someone worth saving. And I'm not going to marry anyone else, not today, not ever, unless it's her. The cathedral exploded again, voices raised in shock and protest. But Sophia Romano, dying and weak but still fiercely present, raised her hand for silence. The gesture was so commanding that the noise actually died down. Victor, she said, her voice thin but clear. Come here. Victor walked to his mother, Isabella still holding his hand, refusing to let go. Sophia looked up at her son. Then at Isabella, her eyes taking in the waitress uniform, the simple appearance, the obvious love that radiated between them. How long? Sophia asked. 4 years. Victor admitted. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was trying to protect her, and I didn't want to disappoint you. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were wet with tears. And you think marrying a woman you don't love, building a life that's a lie, you think that wouldn't disappoint me? I thought you wanted me to marry in good family, to strengthen our position. I wanted you to be happy. Sophia's voice cracked with emotion. When I asked to see you married Victor, I asked because I'm dying and I wanted to know you wouldn't be alone. I wanted to know that someone would love you. Really love you. Not your money or your power or your name. I wanted to die knowing my son had found what your father and I had in the beginning, before the business corrupted everything. She reached out and took Isabella's free hand. Tell me, child. Do you love my son? Isabella met the older woman's eyes without flinching. With everything I am. And do you understand what loving him means? The danger, the complications, the world you would be entering. Yes, Isabella said. I've spent 4 years understanding it. I've studied it, researched it, prepared for it. I know what I'm choosing. And you came here anyway, in your waitress uniform, in front of everyone, knowing you might be rejected, ridiculed, Even targeted. Sophia looked at her with something like admiration. That takes courage. It takes love. Isabella corrected gently. Courage is optional when you love someone enough. Sophia turned back to her son. This girl has more spine than half the men in this room. She walked in here with nothing but the truth in her heart, and challenged all of us to be better than we are. She squeezed both their hands. If you let her go. Victor, you're a fool. And I didn't raise a fool. Sophia, you can't be serious. Antonio started, but his wife cut him off with a look. Don't, she said sharply. Don't you dare tell me what I can and can't approve of from my deathbed, Antonio. We built this family on blood and fear, and look where it's gotten us. Our son has nightmares. Our daughter moved to Paris to escape us. I'm dying at 62 from the stress of this life. Maybe it's time we tried something different. She looked around the cathedral, at the assembled families, at the world she had been part of for 40 years. My son is choosing love over power. He's choosing truth over tradition. And I, for one, am proud of him. The statement sent shockwaves through the room. Antonio looked apoplectic. The Catalano family appeared torn between outrage and relief. Francesca's father was already on his phone, probably trying to salvage some business arrangement from the wreckage. The other guests buzzed with speculation and gossip that would fuel conversations for months. But Victor didn't care about any of them. He looked at his mother with tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, Sophia said with a weak smile. You've just made this girl a target for everyone who sees this as a sign of weakness. You're going to have to be stronger than you've ever been. Smarter than you've ever been, more ruthless than I think you want to be. Can you do that? Can you protect her and love her and still lead this family? Victor looked at Isabella, then back at his mother. With her by my side, I can do anything. Then you better marry her, Sophia said. And do it now. While we're all here and the Archbishop is already present. Make it legal, make it official, make it impossible to undo. Mother, you're not serious. Victor started, but Sophia was already gesturing to the Archbishop. We're having a wedding. Just not the one we planned. Same groom. Different bride, and this time it's going to mean something. The Archbishop looked completely out of his depth. Mrs. Romano, this is highly irregular. There are procedures, preparations, the young lady isn't even dressed. She's dressed in the uniform of honest work. Sophia said firmly. That's more appropriate than any designer gown bought with dirty money. Now do your job, father. Marry my son to the woman he loves. And so it happened. In the most bizarre and beautiful wedding ceremony St. Patrick's Cathedral had ever witnessed, Victor Romano married Isabella Martinez. Half the guests left in outrage. The Catalano family departed en masse, their business alliance in tatters. But those who remained, and there were more than expected, witnessed something extraordinary. Francesca Catalano, freed from a marriage she never wanted, stayed and smiled throughout the ceremony. Some of Victor's younger cousins, those who had grown tired of the ways, remained to support him. And Sophia Romano, dying but triumphant, cried tears of genuine joy as her son finally claimed the life he deserved. Isabella, in her waitress uniform, promised to love and honor Victor Romano. And Victor, in his custom suit that had been meant for a different wedding, promised to love and honor Isabella Martinez. They exchanged rings. Victor used the one meant for Francesca, and Isabella's friend from the community center, who had rushed to the cathedral when she heard what was happening, gave Isabella her own grandmother's ring to use. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by far fewer people than originally planned, but meant infinitely more. It was the kiss of two people who had fought through every obstacle to be together, who had chosen love over duty, truth over convenience, hope over tradition. The reception that followed was nothing like what had been planned. Most of the elaborate food went to waste, the band left. The flowers remained. But half the tables were empty. But the people who stayed celebrated with a joy that the original wedding could never have inspired. Because they were celebrating something real. Antonio Romano left without speaking to his son, his face carved from stone. Victor watched him go and felt a complicated mix of grief and relief. He had disappointed his father possibly irreparably. But he had found himself. And that was worth the price. Sophia stayed until she could barely hold her head up, dancing one slow dance with Victor and Isabella together. Her arms around both of them, whispering blessings and warnings in equal measure. Love each other, she told them. But don't be naive. This world you're in doesn't forgive easily. You'll have enemies now, people who see this as weakness. Prove them wrong. Be stronger together than you ever could have been apart. She died 3 months later, peacefully in her sleep, knowing her son was happy. Victor mourned her deeply, but he also knew he had given her a gift in those final months: the truth. No pretense, no lies. Just a son who loved a woman and wasn't afraid to show it. The months following the wedding were, as Sophia had predicted, difficult. Antonio Romano never forgave his son for the public humiliation, and refused to have anything to do with Isabella. Several of the old guard in the family saw Victor's marriage as a sign that he was too soft to lead and began maneuvering against him. Business deals fell through. Alliances crumbled. There were even 2 attempts on Isabella's life, both thwarted by security measures Victor had obsessively put in place. But Victor and Isabella faced it all together. And in facing it, they began to transform not just themselves but the Romano family itself. Victor, with Isabella's counsel and support, began systematically moving family business away from legitimate enterprises. It was slow, dangerous work. People who profited from the old ways didn't go quietly. But Victor was his father's son, in many ways strategic, ruthless when necessary, and utterly committed to his goals. Isabella continued her work at the community center, refusing to give up her identity to become just a mafia wife. She used her position to create programs that offered alternatives to young people, who might otherwise be recruited into organized crime. She became a bridge between Victor's world and the communities it had once exploited, slowly building tribes from both directions. Together, they developed a vision for what the Romano family could become: a powerful organization. Yes, but one that built things instead of destroying them. That protected people instead of preying on them, that used its influence for something better than just accumulating more power. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and failures. Some people they tried to help betrayed them. Some business ventures collapsed. The transformation they envisioned would take years, maybe decades, maybe generations to fully realize. But they were making progress, step by step, choice by choice, proving that change was possible even in the darkest corners of the world. 2 years after their unexpected wedding, Isabella became pregnant. Victor was terrified. Bringing a child into his world seemed like the ultimate act of hope and hubris combined. But Isabella reminded him that children were always acts of hope. That every parent who brought a life into this uncertain world was choosing to believe in a better future. Their daughter, Sophia, was born on a Tuesday evening, of course. And when Victor held her for the first time, looking into eyes that were already wise beyond their moment, he understood finally and completely what his mother had meant. This child, this perfect combination of him and Isabella, this living symbol of their love. She was worth every sacrifice, every hard choice, every enemy made and battle fought. Because she would grow up knowing that her father had chosen love over duty. That her mother had fought for what mattered. That together they had proved that even people from impossible worlds could find their way to each other. She would grow up with the truth instead of lies, with love instead of obligation, with possibility instead of predetermined destiny. And maybe, Victor thought, holding his daughter and his wife in the hospital room, this was how you changed the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic revolutions, but through small acts of courage repeated over and over. Through choosing love when hate is easier, choosing truth when lies are safer, choosing hope when despair is more rational. The mafia boss who had frozen at his own wedding when a waitress walked in had learned the most important lesson of his life that day. That power comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be honest about who you love. 7 years after that first Tuesday at Giovanni's Trattoria, Victor and Isabella Romano sat in that same restaurant, in that same booth on a Tuesday night. Little Sophia was at home with her grandmother, Isabella's mother, who had moved back from Florida to help with childcare, and had developed an unlikely friendship with some of Victor's reformed associates. Victor ordered the veal marsala. Isabella teased him about being predictable. And they talked about their day, their daughter, their dreams for the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked, the question he had asked 100 times before. "The danger, the complications, the world you married into." Isabella looked at him, at the man who had started as a Mafia prince and slowly transformed into something better, not perfect, not innocent, but genuinely trying to be good. She thought about the wedding that never happened, and the one that did. About the woman in a designer gown who had been saved from a loveless marriage, and the woman in a waitress uniform, who had fought for love. "Every Tuesday," she said with a smile. "I thank God I was working the night you walked through that door." Victor reached across the table and took her hand. And they sat there in the warm light of the restaurant where their story began. Two people from impossible worlds, who had built something possible together. Outside, Brooklyn continued its eternal dance between light and dark, between what is and what could be. Inside, a Mafia boss and a waitress held hands, and proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can openly, honestly, despite every reason not to. And that, at the end of the day, is the only story that matters: two people choosing each other. Over and over again, in a world that insists they shouldn't. The champagne flutes had shattered. The wedding had been ruined. And from the wreckage, something beautiful had emerged. Sometimes, the best endings come from the moments when everything falls apart, and you're forced to rebuild from the truth. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love is worth fighting for, and that people can change when given the right reasons and the right support, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this, because we believe the world needs more examples of courage, more examples of people choosing love over fear, truth over convenience, hope over despair. Because in the end, we are all just trying to figure out who we are and who we want to be. And sometimes, like Victor and Isabella, we need someone else to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves. Sometimes we need someone to walk through the cathedral doors in their work uniform, and remind us that love doesn't care about power or position, or what world you come from. Love just cares that you show up, tell the truth and fight for what matters. And that's a message worth sharing, worth remembering, worth living by, one choice at a time.